So I'm Annie. I'm this year's current education officer, and I'm running to be the next SU president. When I was a student at Bath, I studied education with psychology, and I did a placement year in Madrid.
Cool. And why do you want to be president?
So this year's been absolutely incredible being education officer. I've learned so many new things. It's been a bit of a strange year given that it's all remote, and I would have loved to see everybody more in person. And so I'm hoping that next year we'll be able to bring people back to campus, and that more in-person engagement will be happening. But also this year's just shown how crucial the student voice is, and I've been able to get new opportunities for students to hold senior management to account, and we've got a lot of movement with as an SU and as students to some of the things that we've pushed for this year, like no detriment.
Cool. And what are the three big differences that students will see next year with you as president?
So, well, hopefully a calendar of events designed by them. That's one of the key things that I want to bring to campus, is that students need to be at the forefront of all the decisions made, and their interests need to be a priority. So that would be one of them. Also, I would want to continue lobbying the university to sign the Race Equality Charter. I think that they need to be delivering on set actions that they need to put in place. And also, what is the next one? Oh, a university app. I think speaking to students when I was writing my manifesto, it's something that so many students want, and it's about time that we stop trialling the SU app and we work with the university to create an app that's actually suitable for students.
Cool. That leads nicely to my next question. So you suggested this university app, and that it would be a good idea. Through this pandemic, the political barriers found between university departments have shown to cause consistent problems and have gotten in the way of a successful response to the pandemic. When an institution can't choose between Teams and Zoom, how do you expect them to collaborate on a functional app?
So I think one of the big issues across the university right now is that everything is so disjointed. So students don't know exactly where you need to go to in order to get something. It's you might have a link for one thing, you then go on to book your seat for the library somewhere else, you look at your timetable somewhere else. So I spoke to the Chief Operating Officer about the idea of introducing a university app rather than an SU app, so we can bring this all together. And it is a case of, it would be a project that would have to happen, and it would be working with the university and several stakeholders across the university to come together, and essentially it wouldn't be looking at Zoom or Teams, it would be looking at the wider structures.
So just digging in there, I mean, earlier on this academic year, we saw that different departments of the university couldn't even agree on what IPT meant. Some were saying it was in-person time, others were saying it was in-person teaching. It's those political barriers that I'm talking about bridging. How are you going to get across them when they can't agree on an acronym to build an app and work together on a single tech solution there?
Yeah, so I think across the scale of the teaching happens across the university is massive, and there are so many different barriers, like you said, on a departmental level, and then within the departments across the unit level. And the pushback that we saw with IPT was that faculties took the meanings and the schools took meanings very differently, which then meant the directors of studies and the directors of teaching, and it went down that way. A university app would be at a much higher level, so it wouldn't be looking down, it wouldn't be so disjointed because we would be working at a much higher level to get this done. But the university needs to be really clear when it's saying things like IPT or IPL that it's now changing into, what that means, and stick to their decisions, rather than doing what we saw this year where it just becomes very disjointed.
Changing IPT to IPL sounds like a brilliant use of everyone's time. But moving on quickly, when you talk about ensuring that Brexit doesn't create any barriers for international students, how do you, as a potential president of an SU in Bath, think that you can have anything, thinking that you can do anything to affect such a huge geopolitical shift having an effect on students?
So how, as president, I can support international students with the impacts of Brexit, essentially?
Basically, yeah.
Basically. Okay, so I think here the key one is international students are the students that are going through these changes, so they are the ones that we need to be listening to. As president, it would be my role to work with ISA to make sure that these concerns are fed through ISA, and that we get their voices heard through the different issues. So we already know that EU students are now going to be coming in on a student visa. We know from previous years that linked to the student visa, which is the Tier 4 visa, there are issues with career support. So how do we get that? How do we break down that barrier now so that when there are placement fairs or career fairs, that it is clearly signposted that these providers take Tier 4 or student visa holders, and it's looking at those sorts of things, but also considering that fees are now going to change for international students and EU students, and how we can make sure that they're getting the quality of education that they deserve.
Cool. Sounds complicated. Do you reckon all of that is possible realistically, and is it going to have a real tangible impact on European students?
I mean, if we did nothing, it would have no impact. So I think everything is possible. I think the role as a president, and what I've learned this year as education officer, is that it's really challenging to come in and think you're going to change the world, because it's unrealistic. And I think there's an element of this job that you have to be realistic here, that you can't do everything at once. But what you can do is start breaking down those barriers. So where I can start next year saying about the career support, working with the university, and continuing shouting about an issue, eventually we get to the solution.
Cool. So moving on, you've said in your manifesto that you want to work to make sure that senior management is more transparent. In previous years, the officer team have supported protests, they've worked with media to expose misspending and poor management, and have generally been much more forward and combative in dealing with this relationship. This year, the team's engagement with media has been minimal at best. A Q&A was hosted by you where questions were moderated and no follow-ups asked. And the officer team has prioritised protecting relationships with senior management over challenging their actions and looking to achieve better outcomes for students. If you really believe that senior management should be more transparent, why hasn't that work started this year?
Okay, so actually I can come back with that and say yesterday we had senior management come to academic council where the reps directly asked the questions. There was no question on tuition fees, so we asked senior management there and then what's happening with tuition fees this year. So for me it's been really crucial, and I think speaking to academic reps and the areas that I've worked with this year, you would see that transparency is crucial. So there are general issues, so when it gets to a big Q&A, you can't be asking subject specific level things. I think everyone will understand that that is not necessarily the best use of time, but working with like academic council, how it worked yesterday, where senior management came in, presented an issue, there were working groups, breakout rooms came back, a discussion was had, and then questions were asked, is my way going forward. And I actually think I would agree that student media is crucial here in order to work with the Students' Union to pick out on key issues. And that is an area this year that has probably fallen short as the Students' Union, and an area that I would love to pick up next year as president.
Right, so there's quite a bit to unpack there, isn't there? That Q&A, just jumping back to that. I know you've been busy this year, and I'm sure that seemed like a fairly tiny thing, but it was an important step to see the university senior management coming out and doing that. Certainly the first time I've seen it. I would disagree that what I was talking about was questions being policed so that there weren't at a subject-specific level. I think what we saw is quite freely open questions asked to university senior management, and no difficult kind of tough follow-up questions asked when there perhaps should have been. Do you think you could have done more this year to ensure that those senior managers were held to account and kept transparent?
Yeah, so I'm guessing you mean the big Q&A that happened before Christmas.
That one.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay, I understand that now. Well, first of all, I think that the fact that we had a Q&A is a big step, because in previous years there would never have been a Q&A with senior management. So asking the difficult questions back, it being remotely was incredibly challenging to be sat here asking the questions whilst having someone tell me the questions to be asking. So it was an operation that went across the whole Students' Union. So it might have seemed that it was just the officers presenting and senior management responding, but there was a whole team behind it. Yes, I do believe that there are always those more challenging questions, and I think often this might be what's happening, where those challenging questions, well, actually, it would be interesting to know what an example of a challenging question would be, because things like tuition fees were asked, no detriment were asked, and that in itself is those are the hardest questions that we could probably be asking right now.
Fair enough. We'll move quickly on to some bigger issues, if you can get much bigger than that. So the government is taking action to ensure that free speech on university campuses across the country is protected, and SUs are very much central to that debate. Do you think that there are issues surrounding free speech in higher education? And what's your take on the government's action here?
Yeah, so I first of all am slightly concerned that the government have decided to pick this up now when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that we have seen students not be considered regarding mental health support, tuition fee refunds, the rest of it. And this is the one thing that they have decided to address UK universities on. I know here at Bath that we've had in previous years, I think it was last year, data slightly changed because of obviously the pandemic. I believe there was around 70 external speakers that were put forward with requests. We don't see the issue here that there's no platform speakers. I think freedom of speech is incredibly important, and it's concerning that the government are choosing to put a government elected or previous government position into OFS as the free speech champion.
So you think that was a bad move? It was.
I think it's a controversial move because it's a worry that there is a sense of censorship over what a students' union and a university can now do. I think here at Bath we haven't seen the issue of no platforming for external speakers coming in, and NUS, I believe it was NUS, it may not have been, looked at 10,000 external speaker requests, and of that only 6 weren't denied, and of those 6 it was because of administrative errors, or that they needed a bigger venue. For example, Jeremy Corbyn went to speak at a university and the venue was too small, so they had to, that's the reason why the event was cancelled.
Right, okay, so there's no issue with free speech on university campuses?
There is no. I can't speak on behalf of every university. That would be my response there, and it's something that I think is crucial for Bath to continue making sure that we do have freedom of speech. It's also tricky when the government have policies such as Prevent, which are looking at things like that.
Cool. So considering freedom of speech more broadly, the oversight of student media comes under the President's remit, yet your manifesto makes no mention of it. Would you support student media's editorial independence and free speech on their platforms as President?
Yeah, so I think with student media, it's crucial that they do have that still the autonomy to make the decisions that they want to make. They're crucial to hold officers to account, to hold the students' union, to hold the university to account. That is one of the key parts of what they do. I think there is an element here of building the relationships up and making sure that what they're going to do isn't necessarily a reputational risk in a negative light to the work that is being done. So I'm not saying don't call them out on things that haven't been done, but I'm saying that like big controversial issues that might emerge throughout the year for whatever reason, they need to be it needs to be a careful balance of what is the work that is done. But also I appreciate that student media isn't mentioned on my manifesto. The original manifesto was extremely long, and student media was on there. And I have got plans of things that I would like to do with student media.
So just to circle back, because that sounded like a little bit of a contradiction, you wouldn't please student media unless it was a reputational risk to the SU. If student media was to publish a critical article of SU activities or an SU officer that did pose a reputational risk, you would please that or not?
No, I wouldn't. I don't have. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't believe I have the power to completely stop student media, and I don't think that is right to stop student media doing what they're there to do. I think that's the key bit here. I think the bit that needs to be taken is more the focus on essentially almost working with student media so the we can hold people to account in a professional way.
Right. So I'm not fully sure I understand the kind of implication there, but we'll move on because enough questions. Last area. The SU, it's not actually, it's the second to last area. The SU is facing huge financial problems as a result of the pandemic. Which areas and activities would you prioritise and which would you cut?
So I think this is a real challenge that, yes, the SU is going through financial difficulties. I think that there is, I wouldn't be able to tell you right now which areas I'd cut. I think that needs to be carefully considered by the Board of Trustees, not just one decision. I think students need to be involved in that decision as well. I think there needs to be conversations to see where we can work with student groups to make sure that they're still getting the experience that they want and that they need. I believe that it's not a decision as president for me to turn around and say, no, that's not happening. I think it's a open discussion that needs to be had.
Cool. So the SU received around £300,000 from the university for Freshers Week and the construction of East Village this year, with Freshers Week receiving less engagement than years prior and the East Village struggling to fill seats for the few weeks that it was open. Do you believe that this was a wise use of money? And given the university's track record of frivolous and misguided spending, do you think the university should cover the SU's shortcomings until it recovers from the pandemic?
Yes. So I think that East Village, there were several factors that in a normal year, East Village would have done incredibly well. The fact we were in a pandemic, it wasn't safe. We had lots of students isolating at the time. It wasn't the most convenient location for students that aren't on campus to attend, and I appreciate that. But also the general, you only had to speak to students to find out that actually people didn't necessarily want to be going out at the time. The rule of 6 added a lot of constraints on like who you can go and be with. The 10 p.m. rule meant that normally you would be finishing prees at 10 o'clock, but now you were finishing your night out. So I think there were a lot of additional things. I actually believe that we need to be asking the university to support us in many more ways financially. For example, the calendar of events, speaking to the Chief Operating Officer about who was involved in East Village, we need to be thinking outside the box. And so when we get back, so when the rules lift and we can finally all be back together, that actually we can do things like bath on the beach, or we need to be testing the limits of where we can go, because this year it's shown that they have the money and they are willing to support the SU on those ideas.
So with the SU's current shortcoming or shortfall of £210,000 for this year, would you ask the university to cover that and push for them to do so?
There is part of it that I believe the university should be continuing to support the Students' Union. It's acknowledged that the Students' Union is a fundamental part of the student experience, and without the Students' Union this year, and if it had just been based on the events that the university were running, there would have been a lot less, and we would have seen a greater level of concern for students' welfare.
So sorry, what I'm saying is, and you're giving me brilliant politicians' answers, there's £210,000 shortfall in the SU budget, and that's having a huge impact on sports, on student groups, societies and media and everything else. Will you, as an incoming SU president, ask the university to make up that shortcoming and extend the block grant to cover the loss of income from bars, or not?
Okay, sorry, I probably then misunderstood your question. So essentially, would the university pay that money to bring the SU back to where we were before?
To maintain
the level. I think there is an area of when commercial activity can happen again in the SU, we need to do as much as we can to bring back that commercial income. And we should be asking the university, yes, to continue supporting the SU.
Okay. So to make up the shortcoming that we're seeing now with the cuts that are being made now before commercial revenue returns, making up that shortfall, or no?
I think I wouldn't be able to answer. I think that's a discussion that needs to go through the finance committees of the Students' Union.
Cool, last one. What's your stance on NUS? Should the SU remain affiliated or not?
Okay, so my stance is going to remain probably the same. So wait, I probably should say my stance is going to be remain. My stance is going to be that we need to educate the student to make their own decisions. I am going to be releasing a website as part of my campaign, and on that there is the remain and leave options. As a students' union, we're able to build those connections nationally without necessarily working with NUS, and we are also able to look at what NUS have done this year for us. They haven't necessarily been as present as we would have expected during the pandemic, but I think that the decision shouldn't come from an SU president to dictate what other people are going to end up changing. So I would prefer someone else to make their own decision, and towards the end of the week I will announce my position.
Interesting. We'll all wait eagerly. I will try and push you now though, because that's my job. When students know very little, engage very little with NUS, especially nowadays when they have very little significance, that's probably a personal opinion, but I stand by it. It has very little relevance to people. It costs £30,000 in affiliation fees.
Yeah.
Should we not be making those facts clearer to people and pushing for an angle if that's our belief?
Yeah, so I think that's the transparency of what NUS actually does for us as a students' union is probably a crucial part that's been lacking, which is now seen when we've come round to the referendum. It's what is NUS is the biggest question, because once you take away the commercial side of the bar, the actual £30,000, where's it going, what's it doing, and I think those are the questions that are rightfully being asked, and we need to be more transparent on.
Cool. I won't push anymore. That's it from questions for me, Annie.
Carry on.
Yeah, no more questions from me. Okay. Is there anything you would like to say to our audiences before we let them go?
Well, thanks to you for having me. So yeah, throughout the week, I will have a website that goes out with my priorities, my stances on some national issues, such as the freedom of speech and the Erasmus scheme. And yeah, if you want to achieve with Annie, vote Annie for SU president.